everybody. Welcome back. I'm Taylor, and today we are going to actually be doing something different from our regularly scheduled videos. Like I've said in a few of my social media posts, I'm really working right now to show my support to the WGA and SAG strike. So I felt like I want to still create videos, but I want to do so within the parameters that they have asked content creators to work within. Because of that, we aren't going to be talking about a movie or TV show per se. Instead, we will be talking about the source material that will be inspiring a new Hulu series that will be hopefully coming up before this video.
But I was the only Black woman in editorial for the time I was there, for the most part. Only full-time worker.
Yeah, which is not an unusual situation, and we'll talk a little bit about how it may have changed in the last year or so,
Yes.
but certainly, and my history, which is why I love this book, was, that if a Black woman was hired, there wouldn't be another Black woman hired for maybe a decade.
Nope, you're done. You're done. You check off the box.
Right.
You move on. How we would look at employees, why I was the only one. Seemed crazy to me. Definitely, I think in publishing, and it stretches to a lot of spaces in media and beyond corporate America, really, of the sense of like, this is the way it's always been done. And it's working for us. We're still, at least we're publishing books by Black authors. So like, why does it matter? I mean, no one said that to me, but I do feel like, that diversity, that frontward facing diversity
Sure.
be enough of a reason why like that conversation about talking about who was behind the scenes didn't need to happen, and who's behind the scenes, who is deciding who's getting published, who's getting a book deal, whose voice matters, like that affects everybody. And so I wanted to really show that to readers too, of like, this really benign seeming, and it can be beautiful industry, but also how it can be kind of cultish in a way. You kind of
Right.
go with the flow, and what that looks like for a young Black person.
She was really inspired by just kind of the experiences that she was dealing with, and really wanted to explore that cultiness that is within not just, I think, publishing, but in a lot of corporate and just honestly just random workplaces that appear to be inclusive and diverse, but are really just working on the surface level. I picked up this book because it really spoke to me, because I felt like sometimes microaggression or front-facing diversity, it doesn't appear as sinister as it is once you are directly experiencing it. And it can manifest in ways that you can't really pinpoint and have significant proof that it's happening. So I definitely felt like this was the book that I should be reading at this moment in time, because I was maybe hoping to gain some knowledge, gain some advice or some wisdom. And I will say that while I did not 100% love this book, I really found some of the topics that were brought up to be really thought provoking and worthy of commentary. See what I did there?
You're ridiculous.
I thought about writing a actual synopsis of this book, but I felt like the back blurb honestly does so much better than what I could even come up with. So I'm going to go ahead and read the back of the book so that you kind of get an idea of what this book and subsequent series kind of entails. 26-year-old editorial assistant Nella Rogers is tired of being the only Black employee at Wagner Books. Fed up with the isolation and microaggressions, she's thrilled when Harlem-born and bred Hazel starts working in the cubicle beside hers. They've only just begun comparing natural hair care regimens, though, when a string of uncomfortable events elevates Hazel to office darling, and Nella is left in the dust. As Nella starts to spiral and obsess over the sinister forces at play, she soon realizes that there's a lot more at stake than her career. Having joined Wagner Books to honor the legacy of Burning Heart, a novel written and edited by two Black women, she thought this animosity was a relic of the past. Is Nella ready to take on the fight of a new generation? It's definitely not, I think, my favorite. Now, I think part of that has something to do with the fact that this is Harris's debut novel. So I feel like grading it really harshly is a bit unfair here, just because you can definitely tell that Harris is trying to figure out her writing style and her voice as an author. They do this thing where they like switch between POVs every few-ish chapters, and it's very inconsistent, so you don't always know when it's coming. And I do think that that was definitely like a downside of reading this book, because I would get really interested in a specific person's narrative, and then when I'm ready to read the next chapter, thinking that maybe we'll stay on this person for a while, we would immediately jump back to someone else's point of view, and it just really started to make things confusing. For those who haven't heard about tokenism, I'll give you a brief definition. The idea of tokenism is when a marginalized identifying person is in a majority environment, which means that there is somewhat of a monoculture, whether that be heterosexuality, race, religion, and because they stick out, they are pretty much used as this mouthpiece, this voice for their own community. And you see tokenism a lot more in terms of relations between black and white people. There's a reason why there is a South Park character named Token, okay? I know they changed it to kind of retcon that, but Token, there you go. When you are either explicitly or even implicitly labeled as a token, and sometimes this can be self-imposed. You know, you could be someone that is in a workspace, realize that you are the only person of your culture or ethnicity or sexuality, and you automatically feel this pressure because you feel like you are the representative of that group. And that can really affect the mental health of someone, because you are going to start acting differently so that you can be seen as respectable and professional. For Nella, this comes in a lot of different ways, and some of them are directly spoken about in the book, and some of them are very much just hinted to by how Nella engages with the other people that work at Wagner Books. One of the things that is like a very big character point for Nella is that she did grow up in Connecticut, but she did have two educated black parents who were pretty big on, you know, teaching her what it means to be black. But and I'll kind of get into this. I'm going to get into this, of course. I'm making this video. One of the reasons why I still don't really love that is because I think that when you are socializing and you're in that formative stage of socializing, even though you might have connections to your black heritage from that like parental standpoint, it's really difficult when you're going to schools where you are still the only person that looks like yourself, because you're actually, I think, in my opinion, because this happened to me, I grew up in a very suburban white neighborhood. I went to predominantly white schools, even all the way up until undergraduate. When you're growing up in those kinds of environments and you are the only one, even though Nella is really active in promoting diversity at Wagner, she is very vocal about doing like sensitivity trainings at Wagner. She doesn't really like encapsulate blackness, I think, in a way that even Nella agrees that she's not very comfortable with. She feels like it's a very detached part of her. And that was honestly how I read this book, and that was really how I identified with Nella, because I felt like there was this, I know I'm black, I've always known that I'm black, but now that I'm an adult and I am intentionally seeking out black community and black solidarity, I'm finding it very difficult to find that connection within myself. And I found Nella to be a really good protagonist, and a flawed protagonist at that, because she has this internal conflict with herself. Her boyfriend is white. She has like one Black friend that we actually know about, Malika, who is very much the quintessential. You can tell that she grew up around Black people just by how she kind of engages in conversations with Nella. And you notice that Nella doesn't really always engage the same way back. And I think that like their friendship is very, very significant to the storyline. But I do think that where Nella is kind of seeing this relationship differently from Hazel is because respectability politics does not necessarily happen when you're comfortable. You do it as a coping mechanism, as a survival tactic, and as a way of progressing within your own career. So it's harder to put aside that sense of I'm going to be myself and I'm going to be that more inclusive part of myself that I'm learning when you're, again, a token in a predominantly white publishing house. There's also another reason why being a token is honestly so detrimental to not just yourself and your own individual progress, but to the progress of those who come after you. While tokenism might not necessarily seem a nefarious position to be put in, it can really result in role entrapment, which means that you are pretty much forced into a box and you are forced to kind of perform a very specific version of yourself. And anyone who's ever felt like they can't be themselves at work will really understand this, regardless of ethnicity and race. For those who do not know about respectability politics within the Black community, I'll kind of briefly get into this, but if you really want to get a full deep dive, I really recommend checking out FD Signifier's video. He kind of gets into the Black conservative movement and how, Black respectability politics really plays into this movement. Nadrea Njoku and Lori Patton wrote an article about respectability politics in HBCUs, and I really found this article to be really significant kind of because of some of the stuff that we'll get into later in this video. To give you an idea and a definition of what this respectability politics entails, I really would say check out this full article. I will be providing the citation below, but to kind of sum it up, it is the idea of negating really harmful stereotypes that have been projected onto Black people for so many years. When you think about stereotypes between Black people, it's that they're lazy, they're uneducated, they're always seeking out a handout, right? These are all things that you will hear people kind of use in their very ignorant arguments about why Black people deserve X, Y, and Z kind of treatment. And so the idea of respectability politics was a way to combat that. And you do so by promoting cleanliness, polite manners, self-restraint, sexual purity, and frugality to disrupt negative perceptions of Black people. Black respectability appeases two audiences: Black people who want to be respected and viewed as respectable, and white people who need evidence of educated, civilized, and hard-working Black people. And these things are rooted in heteronormative femininity and a desire to be viewed as respectful. This gets into the hair controversy of whether or not women should be wearing weaves and straightening their hair instead of wearing it in traditionally Black styles. The whole argument about bonnets. I'm pretty sure disgraced Bill Cosby even made a few comments about the way men were wearing their pants at the time that he was at, prominence within his career. And it's crazy because when you really get down to respectability politics, a lot of times this is policed within the community. It's not necessarily done in microaggressive ways by other people. Sometimes it's your mom, it's your auntie, it's your professors. And that's why I found this article to be so interesting, because they were seeing this behavior being done by older Black academics within the colleges. And so it really does reinforce the white narrative that we have to work twice as hard to get half as much. I used to literally have it as a mantra for myself until I realized how harmful and honestly how ridiculous it is. I should not have to work twice as hard to be considered as respectable or as professional as some of my white and non-black counterparts. And it just felt like, again, this pressure, this role entrapment to be this type of person in a way that could potentially negate who I was outside of my professional spheres. I remember growing up, and I think I even talk about it in my Bama Rush video with Ryan, who I interviewed, who was featured in that documentary, about how, you know, once you start leaning into the respectability politics, that gets into things like code switching, where you'll speak a specific way because you are engaging with a specific audience. And how, you'll come across people who are honestly sometimes white liberals and will say things like, oh, you speak so well. Oh, you're this, you're that. And they think that they are complimenting you. But in reality, it's a backhanded compliment. Because what does that mean? Are you trying to say that because I have been executing a certain level of proficiency in my language that I am the exception? I think this also gets into the whole idea of like a perfect victim. Like when I think about George Floyd and I think about some of the other Black Americans that have been targeted by police brutality, it's this idea of, well, they weren't innocent. They had this background. And I even am reminded, just because this is so recent, of the influencer that was abused and attacked by another Black individual because she denied him her phone number. And so many people are coming to the man's defense by saying that this woman is deserving of harm because she does not adhere to this perfect victim role. And that's why role entrapment is so harmful, and why tokenism is so harmful, because even though these are not necessarily workplace situations, when you carry on this idea that certain people are this and certain people are that, you really hinder allowing people to be human and flawed. And then when things outside of the workplace and even within the workplace occur, people want to make exceptions. They want to make justifications for why someone was not received the same way. And I think that this is something that Harris really gets into with the character of Hazel. So, as I said in the synopsis, Hazel is this Harlem born and bred Black woman with locks. She has an artist boyfriend who is Dominican. She is very much this idealized heteronormative femininity, but with a 2020-ish tinge to it. Nella is completely taken aback by this because she feels like, even though she has been adhering to respectability politics, that, Hazel, who's kind of like using AAV and being very casual with people in the workplace, is gaining more respect than her. She's shown that despite really tailoring her behavior while at Wagner, that she is not getting the same amount of opportunities as Hazel is. She's starting to sit in on sensitivity readings. Things that were originally Nella's job are now being given to Hazel, who's only been there for 2 months. She's being able to kind of speak her mind and get to know and even influence Nella's boss, Vera, who at that point is very much the emblematic white liberal woman who says that she loves diversity, but at the same time does not champion Nella in situations where, when she needs to call out this lack of diversity, that she is being heard. And I found this article by Therapy for Black Girls. I've never actually seen their blog before, I am a huge fan of their podcast. If you are a mental health professional and you are really interested in having like a more multicultural background and just approaches to bringing towards therapy, especially if you are providing therapy for Black women, I totally recommend it. I found this article, it's about respectability politics and kind of just like why it doesn't work and how, you see through Nella that it doesn't work. So in the article, they say that instead of requiring the people and the institutions committing and propagating racist acts to change, it asks the people harmed by the racism to change, to stop being harmed by the racism. Now, that kind of gets back into some of these other like outside workplace things that have been just mulling in my head when I was doing research for this video. The idea of respectability politics does not ask the institution to change. It asks the individual, which almost victim blames that individual into feeling like there's something wrong with you. And so you need to emulate kind of that heteronormative femininity that I was discussing as a way to be considered respectable. That poses so many issues because what it ends up doing is it ends up reinforcing this Anglo-European narrative that to be white is to be right, and that ingratiating yourself in whiteness is going to be the only acceptable pathway towards professional elevation. Now, I spoke a little bit off when I said that Hazel does not really adhere to respectability politics. In some way she does, but like in a Huxtable style. Oh gosh, there's too many Bill Cosby references in this video. Oh God. It is the best way to really understand where I'm going with, because I do think that there is ingratiating yourself in complete whiteness, the Candace Owens kind of people, and then there's like this middle ground, because obviously this is a spectrum, and everything is not a monolith, but there's this like midsection of people who are unapologetically Black but still adhere to respectability politics as a way of benefiting themselves, and again, as a way of, to some degree, whether this be knowing or unintentional, feeding into this narrative. Whilst Hazel isn't really, doing it in that first camp, she is definitely in the second, because there are moments where she could 100% show some real solidarity to Nella and chooses not to. And I think that because she doesn't, it really does create a divide between her and Nella. When Nella and Hazel first meet, they definitely do bond on just the fact that they share this kinship with each other. And you notice that when Hazel takes Nella out to lunch, Nella feels like immediately intimidated by Hazel. There is this weird sense, kind of like I was saying, she's newly coming into her own as a Black woman. And so she sees this unapologetically Black woman with her locks, and she's wearing patterns and bright colors in a way that Nella is not. Nella is very much described in the book as wearing a lot of like not neutral colors, but I mean she does, but like it's not all neutral. A lot of times she'll have like a plum sweater or things like that, but it's definitely like more darker colors. She definitely dims her shine. And so when she meets Hazel, she's noticing that Hazel doesn't do that, and that almost makes her feel inadequate as a Black woman, especially because she is dating a white man who is definitely an ally. I love how much of an ally he is in this book. But I do think that, when women, especially Black women, when we get into interracial relationships, there is this tribalistic guilt that we get. And sometimes it's because of other people. It's not necessarily because we chose a non-Black partner. Sometimes it's, when you go on a date with your non-Black partner and people are giving you bombastic side eye, it makes you feel weird and it makes you feel like what you're doing is wrong. And so I think that that is definitely something that like kind of already predisposes Nella to being intimidated by Hazel once Hazel starts to really like climb the corporate ladder. I'm actually going to read a quote from the book because I feel like it really gets into some of the feelings that Nella has towards Hazel. Slowly but surely, in the hopes of making the ride a bit smoother, in the hopes of getting a promotion, she'd accepted every excuse. She picked her battles, if she dared pick any, wisely. After all, that was what she had been taught. To stand still for so long that when you started to run, they'd be so dumbfounded that they wouldn't even follow. Well, that was what Nella had been doing, standing still. And now here was Hazel, miles ahead. In that moment, it didn't matter that her new coworker had single-handedly discovered how to turn the status quo upside down in just a couple of months. Nor did it matter that Hazel had found a way to open the door for other people of color at Wagner. All Nella could think was that she felt redundant. Utterly and painfully redundant. Oh, like, again, this is a debut novel, but there are just some moments in this book when Harris wrote something, I really felt it, and I felt this passage so much because I felt like she just got to the heart of the issue, that feeling of redundancy when you have done this, everything right, and then someone who again is not in that first camp, they're not completely detaching themselves from other Black people, they are still engaging in Black community, they are hyping up other Black people, at least on surface level, but to some degree are not really engaging in a deeper level of solidarity. And this really gets into like that third thing that I was, mentioning at the beginning of this video, and that is the intercompetition between Black people, but specifically in this context, Black women. So another article that I found, which is specifically taking place in PWIs, is a article by Sienna Leith et al. And she talks about how vital Black women friendships are when you are finding yourself working in predominantly white spaces or in this context white institutions. I really found this really significant because now that I am getting older and I am really working on developing myself as not just a person but as a Black woman, and I think that I've noticed within friendships that I've really started to crave a friendship with another Black woman and like a deep connection. And while I do have some Black female friends, we're either, in our own world with just working, and now that I'm in that age group where everyone's getting married, like people are married now, so it's not like you can necessarily see everyone all the time, or we're states apart, so it makes it really hard to have that sense of community on a consistent basis because you're just not seeing these people every day. And so I've really started to like crave having this more Black female centric community while I'm still, living here. And I really found it to be really difficult just because it's harder making friends as adults. And that's why I really found this article to be very significant, because it really hits this like idealist, or the idealist in myself. I'll speak for myself. It really hits the idealist in me in a way that I felt like, oh, I really wish I had this when I was in undergrad. While resident halls are supposed to be a safe and inclusive space, racist and sexist experiences may inhibit the extent to which Black female students feel comfortable in majority white dorm spaces. Helping one another navigate bias and discrimination was only one element of these Black female relationships, demonstrating that the significance of Black female friendships went well beyond challenging racism and sexism. They found a unique form of solace or sense of coming home in their friendships with other Black women because they could be themselves. They were also less likely to code switch or worry about whether their black girlfriends viewed them through a deficit-based or stereotypical lens. So obviously we're not seeing that between Hazel and Nella, but I do think that you see this kind of relationship between Nella and her friend Malika. Malik? I feel like it's Malika. I think that's how it's pronounced. I really cannot wait for the show to come out so that I can figure out what the actual pronunciation is, because she, in the book, even will correct other people. I think she corrects another black woman who says it wrong, and I just loved her. She was honestly my favorite character in this book because she was not afraid to step into you, girl. She was not afraid. But while she has this, like, coming home sense of community with her friend Malika, like I said, she's at work and doesn't always see Malika. So she would assume, or she would just guess by her current experience with her, that she would have the same thing with Hazel. This is where the conversation gets a little sticky. What do you do when you realize that all skin folk ain't kinfolk? What do you do? Because honestly, I still don't know. Without getting into like specifics within the book, because again, like I know I kind of have talked a lot about, you know, some spoilerish things that will probably appear in this Hulu series. This is something that I really don't want to spoil this one, because I do feel like it gets into that third act, it gets into that big twist, and I don't really want to like ruin that. Pulling ourselves out of this book, what do you do? And why does this matter? And I think it goes back to some of the out of office examples that I have kind of been, you know, sprinkling throughout this video. Why do we see people like Ye and Candace Owens who actively say harmful things about the black community? I think this gets into some of the stuff that they talk about with like Uncle Tom's. It's the idea of, you know, kind of how like in history, black people would sometimes be the people that would catch runaway slaves. It's this sense of using white supremacy as a way of fragmenting people. When I was younger, and I was really starting to like ask a lot of questions in college about just my blackness and like why I felt very just, I don't want to say I was unwelcomed. I think maybe I felt insecure about my place within the black community to just let myself be vulnerable in these kinds of spaces. But I distinctly remember going to my mom and I was like, hey, I really want to know why, you know, I'll have maybe potentially a black friend, and then next thing I know, there's jealousy or there's competition between us, and then we end up really never being friends after these kinds of, you know, fallouts. And she had me read the Willie Lynch letter. I'm not going to show it because I feel like, one, it's long, and two, I'm not trying to give this man any more, you know, infamy than he already has approached. But this letter was written by someone who was a slave owner who was teaching slave ownership to other white Americans during the height of the slave trade. And one of the main things that he talks about is that you can break the body, but what we really need is generational loyalty, which requires breaking the spirit. In that, he means turning brother against brother, making black people feel like they cannot trust each other. And then you see how this slave tactic, because that's legit what it was, has now been transposed into the policing of respectability towards other blacks, the condemnation of black conservatives to black liberals, the homophobia and transphobia to black, queer, and trans people. It's a lot. And when people say racism is an institution, they are not lying, okay? That is the real crux of this story that Harris has created for us. It's this idea of fake solidarity for the sake of appearances, for the sake of manipulation. And again, sometimes this is not done intentionally, but intent does not negate impact. And I think that is why I really, really wanted to talk about this book. And while I won't talk about this series, I will be watching it because I do want to see this become a bigger discussion after this has aired. I want to see people talking about this kind of situation that I think we don't, within the Black community, acknowledge within ourselves. We don't really consider how sometimes very superficial and surface level our solidarity will really go. With that being said, I don't like ending videos on like a negative mindset. So if you are watching this video and you identify with this book, and you identify with, this series once it comes out, I really want to know how you've combated this, whether it be tokenism within the workplace, respectability politics, competition with other Black people in the workplace, and even outside, because that stuff happens in so many other avenues. It does not necessarily have to be at work, but I do think that work is where you will definitely see it, because there is this idea that there's not many seats at the table and you want the Black one. And so I really am curious to know, how do you bring another chair? What does that look like for you? Have you experienced this before where you wanted to bring another chair and the other person pushed you off of it? I'm really curious to know your thoughts. I will say, at the end of the day, this wasn't a perfect book, but that's okay. I don't expect things to be perfect. And I think that while it isn't perfect, and while I had some issues with like the pacing and the different POVs and even the twist, that it really had me think. It had me really want to introspect a bit after reading. And I think that is what a good book does. It really does have to ask questions that you have to scratch your head over because they don't have immediate answers. And so I really want to know what you guys think, and I really want to know if you're going to be watching this series. I will be kind of, again, because of the strike, because I want to be respectful, I will be kind of switching some stuff around with the upcoming videos for the rest of this year. But I will be kind of doing, for Halloween and for the fall season, I'm really considering doing some like throwback movies. So if there are some throwback like Halloween horror-esque movies, because I it doesn't matter how horror it is, as long as it's not Terrifier, I will watch it, and I would be down to do a review on it. I'd love to have a discussion about The Other Black Girl and about this amazing thriller that is about to, come onto our small screens in the next few days. But I also really do want to know for future videos if you have any recommendations that you want me to check out. And before I let you go, please make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at CriticalCom with 2M's TV. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Bye, everybody.